Okay. Ethics. So the book is called the Nicomachean Ethics. Just big picture here. Ethics, Aristotle is going to define as the science of human happiness. Now, the funny thing is, Aristotle says politics is also the science of human happiness. And what does he mean by science? I mean, when we think of science, we think of microscopes and, Dr. Fauci in a white lab coat and everything. When he says science, he means a body of knowledge that's a result of empirical investigation of some type of method rooted in logic and questioning and, presenting evidence and evidence that is presented logically in a logically consistent way. So in fact, it's not that much different. The difference is we don't think of ethics as a science, because when we think of issues of right and wrong, good and bad, or of happiness itself, we think of these things as not having simple scientific answers. Like we can determine the rate of gravity, we can determine how heavy a rock is, we can determine like the frequency of a sound, and that's like objective quantifiable knowledge. But when we get to moral questions, they don't seem to have those simple, what we call objective fixed answers. We think of these questions more in terms of, well, it depends on the opinion of the person you ask, or that these questions are subjective, that by which we mean something like, well, again, it depends on who you ask. It's their opinion, and there is no perfectly right or wrong answer to moral questions. And therefore, happiness is not one fixed thing. It's kind of whatever each person believes. Well, let me ask this question, because I mean, this whole notion of a science of ethics and a science of happiness sounds kind of, maybe we can't have a science of happiness. Do people believe there is an objective answer to what happiness is, or is it just relative to who you're asking? What do people think? What if you ask someone, hey, what's your definition of happiness? And they gave their definition, and you said, no, this is the real definition of happiness. You don't know what you're talking about.
I feel it's subjective.
You feel it's subjective?
Yes, to the person.
Okay. Anyone disagree with Nefertiti? Is happiness just whatever we feel like it is? So Thais says, I think everyone would have their own opinion of happiness. I would agree. And so would Aristotle, that everybody has their own opinion. The question is everybody right when they assert their own opinion? And we can't argue that there's a kind of core understanding of happiness that transcends everybody's opinion.
I feel that they're entitled to what you said. Like everybody's going to have their own opinion and of what happiness, and it's no right or wrong answer.
Okay. There's no right or wrong answer. All right. So that's what I mean by relative, which means the definition of happiness or the definition of right or wrong is relative to each individual person. And there's not some kind of unifying common ground we can all agree on. Okay. We'll come back to that in just a second. Let's be clear. Aristotle is making, from our point of view, a kind of radical claim or argument that human happiness is something objective, and it can be objectively understood, and that there is, generally speaking, he's going to assert, and we can disagree with him once we understand what it is. He's going to assert there is a definition to happiness that is kind of universal or general to the human species. And it's going to have to do with how he understands the human being. So we'll come to it in just a second, but we notice early on in the ethics, he talks about ends and means and the thing for which we do everything else. And it's kind of obscure language. And then he starts talking about the nature of plants versus the nature of animals versus the nature of humans. And this is a very kind of famous argument where he says, you know what? We're going to figure out what, since happiness is a distinctly human experience, we're going to figure out what happiness is by looking at what the human being is fully. We're an animal. We have certain things in common with all other animals, but then we're also distinct from all other animals. And we're going to find our definition of happiness in the way in which we're distinct from all other animals. So he argues very clearly that there's an objective kind of idea of what happiness is for the human being. Number one. Number two, do we really want to say that all morality really has to do with happiness? If you think about it, remember those lawmakers in the city-state, in the polis, they are making those laws under their conception of happiness. Happiness gets manifest. You say, this is what happiness is. And if this is what happiness is, therefore this is good and this is bad, right? So in some way, it's that simple. Filling in the details is what's complicated, right? Do we really want to say all aspects of good and bad are simply relative to people's opinion? We're all relativists today. And partly the reason we're all relativists is because the principle of equality in America, historically, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all human beings were created equal. It compels us and it encourages us to naturally respect everybody's opinion as equal. And if everybody's opinion is equal, everyone has a right to their own opinion. And if they say something we disagree with, well, that's just their opinion and they're entitled to it, right? So there's some interesting complication. Makes us kind of relativists. Do we want to see, do we want to say all issues of right and wrong are just relative to people's opinion?
You can argue that if you want to be technical.
Okay, let's get to, well, we don't have to get too technical.
Yeah.
Why don't we just say there were these people at the turn of the century of the 19th century in America, and then by the 1830s, the 1840s, 1850s, they really liked slavery, and they became a party, the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party became built around the principle of slavery, and for them, slavery was good. And not just any, because, well, slavery had been practiced throughout all of humanity since the dawn of civilization itself. But they even had a more specific notion of slavery, that the people we're going to enslave are people of a certain race and a certain color that's different from us, because we believe by definition that they're inferior, right? And what did they say about slavery? They said slavery is good for the white man and it's good for the black man as well, right? So we're going to accept that argument simply because it's someone else's opinion?
No, not at all.
So if you want to get to the $1,000 question, you're going to have to tell me why not.
I think at that point it's a disregard of, well, what's the word I'm looking for? You're disregarding, I guess, like a person's rights, human rights, to an extent.
Yes, we would say human rights.
I'm struggling to find the word for it, but that.
Let me come back to it. What gives us human rights?
Our soul.
Actually, you're kind of on the right track there. What are you disregarding when you treat another human being as a slave?
Their emotion.
Oh, I think it's much more than our emotion.
Their body.
Even more than that. Mohammed, you want to chime in?
Yeah, the humanity.
Their humanity.
That's the word. Yeah, he got it.
And I think there's some other words that we can use that are kind of synonyms of that. Oh my goodness. You have said there is some humanity in human beings that actually starts to clarify objectively that certain conduct is good and certain conduct is bad. We've just made an argument that slavery, which is to say enslaving another human being, is by definition bad because of something in human nature, right? Is that essentially what we're saying? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, more or less.
Everybody else agree with that? Are we there?
Muhammad has his hand raised.
Mohammed, go for it.
You're referring to like the slavery that occurred in the Americas, or like slavery like that occurred before them?
Well, I mean, I specifically referenced America pre-Civil War, but we could be talking about any.
Sorry, I had to do something, because the slavery before the Americas, it wasn't like the one that happened in the Americas, because it wasn't due to race. It was just due to, you know, nations going to war and
Yeah,
like them
well,
taking, yeah.
it was many different things. What you say, I don't want to get too down this road because we'll get on other topics, but what you say is partially and significantly true, in that there were definitely very specialized racial theories of slavery that developed. And it's interesting, these theories of these racial theories of slavery, they actually really developed in the 19th century, despite the fact that there had been African-American slaves here prior to the 19th century, obviously going back to, 1619, right?
Yeah, because the slavery that occurred in America, it was the first slavery where they actively sought out an ethnicity. Because even like whenever, like before then, slaves were just taken from nations that were gone to war with. And even in Africa, like there was like for example, my country, Niger, they like if they fought against other, tribes, they take them as slaves, but they wouldn't treat them like how they treated slaves here in America. They treated them
Well,
basically just servants, essentially.
I don't want to get into a whole history of this. So a lot of what you say is true, although some slaves in history were treated very terribly.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And some were picked out as inferior for their racial or their religious identity.
That's true.
Absolutely. But there was something more systematic in America that developed. And the interesting thing is, it wasn't always that way in the United States. The racial theories, if you look into the history, they really started to develop in the first couple decades of the 19th century. Okay, but so here's the thing. We've made an argument that human nature is such that there are at least general categories of right and wrong that we can say are objective, right? And our categories of right and wrong have to deal with human happiness. That which is right should promote our happiness, and it's encouraged because you get rewarded for doing the right thing. And that which is wrong does not bring human happiness, it brings misery, and therefore it's discouraged. So if we take another really simple example like murder, right, which is the unlawful, unjust killing of another human being, because there are some contexts where we could at least argue that there's a justice behind it, like self-defense. What's the idea of murder? There's something in human nature that makes it unjust to unlawfully kill another human being in a way that doesn't apply when, for example, I don't know, you kill a fly, right? When people talk about killing a fly, you don't talk about murdering the fly, because the very concept of murder implies a kind of unjust killing of something that's prohibited. And why is it prohibited? Because something about the humanity of the other human being, something about the dignity of that being, and having it something to do with it's a conscious being like you, and you have no right to do this. And of course, the right applies to you too. It protects you from getting bonked on the head. So even if we don't agree with everything Aristotle says here, we can start to see the plausibility of devising an objective notion of happiness. right? Because we have no problem saying that it is objectively wrong to enslave anybody, and it's objectively wrong to kill anybody. And that argument of why it's wrong to do those things has everything to do with something about human nature and what we are. Okay. So one other key element of his definition of happiness is it obviously involves friendship. This book that's dedicated to human happiness, the ethics or Nicomachean ethics, it has been celebrated for, well, over 2 millennia, over 2,000 years for its definition, its explanation, its depiction of human friendship. And that depiction of friendship occurs in books 8 and 9. Next week, we're going to look at book 8. And then the following week, we're going to look at book 9. And at the very beginning of book 8, and you probably haven't read it yet, but doesn't matter. Aristotle says this. He says, without friends, no one would choose to live, even if he possessed, I'll put it this way, everything else, right? So what's he say? What? I'll read it again. Without friends, no one would choose to live, even if he possessed all other goods. This is the way Aristotle speaks. Nothing I can do about it. We have to translate him into something we understand. What is Aristotle saying here? What is Aristotle saying about a life without friends? Mohammed?
This goes back to like how we talked about how humans need human interaction, like
Absolutely.
in lives. And on top of that, you know, he's essentially saying money can't essentially buy happiness. Like you need basically, if you have no money, but you have like a lot of friends that generally love you and you love them, you can have a great life. But if you have nobody around you that you can trust, people that are you suspect of backstabbing you, and you have all the money, it's not worth living like that. If you understand what I'm trying to say.
Okay, good. So it's interesting. Possessed all other goods. So what you think primarily about money, right? And that's probably something that is on the top of his list too. But notice it's not just money, but all other goods. And Aristotle uses the word good to mean anything that you might desire that you think is beneficial to you, not necessarily like consumer goods, right? Like products, but it could include that. That's one way he uses that word goods. So Ganel says, no one would want to live. Yes, very good. So Muhammad said it could be fame, it could be power. We're going to look at these 3 lives in a few minutes, right? Without friends, no one would choose. What does Aristotle think of a life without friends? How valuable is it? It's what?
It's worthless.
Absolutely. He's not just saying you need friends. He's saying a life without friends is worthless. And I think one thing he's saying here is a life without friends is not a human life, in the sense that you're not living a fully human existence, because what really matters, and there might be a few things higher than just friends that they help you with, but all that other stuff is worthless unless you have friends. Now, based on your reading of book 1, which is not easy, how much do you think Aristotle cares about all those other goods? Do you think Aristotle thinks fame, power, and money have some role to play in happiness? Or is he like kind of like a monk where you can just do without all those things together and you have friends and you don't need anything else?
He seems like a monk to me. Like he's just an observant and a studier of life. Like he's very visual.
Absolutely. Let me clarify. How does a monk live? They don't care about fame. They don't care about money. They live in a monastery. They live a life of poverty. That's the life of Jesus, right? Imitatio Christio, imitate the life of Christ. Live a life of poverty. Dedicate yourself to God. Abandon all the worldly pleasures of family, of money, of influence, of fame or good reputation. No earthly possessions. Yep. Is Aristotle saying that earthly possessions don't matter at all? What does he say in book 1? Does Aristotle think money has some role to play in happiness? Some role. Not the role, but some role.
He does.
Okay, good. Let's be clear. So Aristotle is writing as a Greek in the 4th century BC. There's no influence. First of all, there's no Jesus Christ at this moment. He's not been alive yet. There's no Christianity. And so Christianity is going to take the idea of virtue and make it into this hermetic life of the monk, where you abandon your worldly possessions and you dedicate yourself to God, and all the things like of human existence that people would prize, you're supposed to give up, right? Aristotle, as a Greek, definitely does not agree with that. He definitely agrees about a righteous life, absolutely. But his vision of a righteous life is going to be a little different than the Christian image. In some ways, they're going to be very similar, especially because Christianity dovetailed on Greek thought. But in other ways, it's going to be different. For him, friends are absolutely essential. If you think about the life of the monk, the only thing that really matters is what? What relationship?
With God.
Yes. For the monk, the relationship that really matters is God. And Saint Augustine, one of the famous Christian theologians, like 3rd, 4th century AD, after Jesus was alive. He kind of condemned friends and things like reputation and power as not important. And Aristotle says that he's going to say that money is important. He's going to say that even your position in society is important. He's going to say that friends are really important to your happiness. The thing he's going to add is just that money is important, but it's not everything. It's what you do with your money. Money is not an end in itself, right? Okay. Let me just. It's 8:20. Where do I want to pick up here? Okay. Let me just go over a few things that we talked about last week, and then I want to read some passages for the rest of class, and we'll call it a night. The most important section of book 1 is section 7. It's book 1, section 7, or I 1.7. And he says, if we're going to understand what human happiness is, we need to understand what human nature is. And this brings us back to not just his conception of human nature, but his conception of nature at large, right? And so the Greek word for nature is physis. It's where we get our word physics, because what is physics? It's basically the science of nature. Simple as that. And for him, the idea of physis is that the physis of a thing, the nature of a thing, is just its essence or its core identity. It's the permanent features of the thing that persist over time in contrast to its accidents. So Aristotle, in his writings, contrasts the distinction between the nature of a thing versus accidents. And I'll clarify what that means in just a second, because this issue of the notion of human nature is really central to his definition of happiness. So here we're talking, a human being is a living being. It's not like a rock. So in nature, the rock has a certain type of nature, which is it sits there and it has a certain structure and stuff like that. But the nature of a human as a living thing, it has a cycle of life, which is to say it's born, it grows, and it develops to a state of maturity. And we said that Aristotle understands the full nature of a thing at its moment of full maturity. That therefore the nature of a human being is not just that we have a certain DNA, or not just that we have a certain shape to our body that's different from, I don't know, certain types of chimpanzees or something like that in the evolutionary chain, but that our nature consists of our state of full development, a kind of peak development. And if you think about what happiness is, happiness as a kind of fulfillment is really, in a sense, the fulfillment of our natures. And what kind of nature we have? We have one that develops over time to a kind of peak of maturity, and we have a rational nature. So interestingly enough, he's going to make an argument that the development of our nature is a process of achieving happiness through the development of the use of our reason. Moral virtue and intellectual virtue involve the use of our reason. I don't want to talk about this, but let's do this and we'll come back to it. In chapter 5, oh, I want to put it up here. Hold on. There we go. In chapter 5 of book 1, he asked the question, well, what do most people think happiness is? Kind of the question I asked y'all. What do you think happiness is? And he gives 3 explanations for what most people think happiness is, right? And this is going to be really important for things that he will say about friendship later on. Could someone read here, starting at chapter 5, where he says, let us speak from where we digressed? Who could volunteer to read for us?
I can do it.
Great, thank you, Graham.
Oh, let me get my glasses. Hold on.
Yep, make this a little bigger.
All right. Let us speak from the point where we digress, for on the basic of the lives they led, the many and the critics seem to suppose, not unreasonably, that the good had happiness or pleasure, and thus they cherish the life of enjoyment. For the especially prominent ways of life are 3, the one just mentioned, the political, and the third, the contemplative.
Contemplative. Okay, good. So let me just go back over it. He says, for on the basis of the lives they lead, the many and the, well, let me skip that part. The lives they lead, that the good and happiness are pleasure. So first of all, what is he insinuating here? The basis for our opinion about happiness is connected with the type of life we lead. What's the relationship between our opinion of happiness and our life? Mohammed.
Well, spend our life doing what we believe is the root of happiness. So if we think that money is the root of happiness, we'll spend our time trying to get money. If we believe the root of happiness is helping people, we'll spend our life helping people.
This is really crucial observation. In one sense, it's really simple, but it's a really important observation. And that's very well said, Mohammed, right? We live our opinion of happiness, right? I couldn't have said it better than Muhammad. If we think money is important, we pursue money. If we think romance is important, we spend our time pursuing romance, and so on and so forth. If we think family is important, if we think that's the definition of happiness, we spend our time cultivating our family, making a family, paying the bills, all that wonderful stuff, right? So Aristotle immediately acknowledges that people have different ways of life, they live differently, they think differently about the world, and therefore they have different opinions of happiness. So this is a moment in the text where he acknowledges that because people desire different things and have different opinions of happiness, they live different lives and therefore don't agree on what happiness is, right? And he says this. He says, for on the basis of the lives they lead, the many and crudest seem to suppose, not unreasonably, that the good and happiness are pleasure. Okay, when he says the good and happiness, he's being redundant here. Happiness is the human good. It's the highest human good. What is he saying? Let me boil this down. He says the majority of people who are crude believe happiness is pleasure. First of all, what kind of pleasure do you think he's talking about? Any guesses?
Repeat the question.
He says people, he describes the many, most people in his world and the crudest believe that happiness is pleasure. What kind of pleasure do you think he's talking about? There are different types of pleasure.
It could be financial. It could be status. You know, the pleasure of being high in status, like, you know.
He's going to get to that in the next one.
It's a bunch of different things. It could be sexual.
Okay. No, you're okay. You're good. We have to clarify. He talks about the few. He's a sociologist, and he divides society up into groups he calls the few and a group he calls the many. And this is the ancient world where they don't have like modern capitalism and modern democracy and everything. And for him, when he talks about the few, he normally means the few people who have some wealth and the many people who don't, right? And the many people who don't, not only do they not have money, but they don't have education. Because in his world, if you want to get an education, you have to have money to spend for it. You also need to have the time to get the education. As we saw in the politics, if you're working all the time, you can't get the education because you got to work. So therefore, the many, because they don't have education, they're also the quote crudest. What does it mean to be crude? What does it mean to be crude? Anyone?
Uppity, snobbish.
I'm sorry?
Does it mean uppity or like snobbish?
Almost the opposite of snobbish. He's being kind of snobbish, I would say.
I would take it as.
How do we use this? I mean, maybe you don't use it every word, but we all use this. We all know what the word crude, to be crude, means. What does it mean to be crude? It's been the same way.
Polite, rude.
Be
Yeah.
rude.
Lacking in manners, not knowing how to carry oneself, lacking self-control, right? Shooting your mouth off, not having a kind of certain type of decorum that's required in certain, environments, like a classroom, you've got to act a certain way. So why does he say these many people are crude? Because they're poor and they lack education, right? What do they think happiness is? They think happiness is physical pleasure, right? Okay. What do we, so when he uses the word pleasure here, he means physical pleasure. What do we think about that? Is happiness the life of physical pleasure? So that's what is he doing here? He's proposing three examples from society, the kind of three dominant opinions of what his society has said happiness is, right? He's acknowledging that people have different opinions about what happiness is. Physical pleasure, what examples? I don't know. Sleeping, eating, drinking, having sex. Is that all that happiness is? So people say no. What's missing? What else would we need for happiness in your opinion? All right, so Nefertiti says love and the need to be wanted. Well, the solution to that is I hang out with other people who like physical pleasure and we do stuff together. Maybe it's sex, or maybe it's just we have a beer together and watch a football game. That's almost kind of physical pleasure, maybe a little different. So some people talk about success, meeting goals, and the goals then have to be other than just physical pleasure, right? Because we could set a goal of physical pleasure. Religion, mental stability. Okay, good. So, well, let's put it this way. Everyone now is identifying the same problem Aristotle has with happiness as being physical pleasure. Stupid question. Should life be painful physically? Yeah, I don't think we want, here's the catch, and this is Aristotle. He's going to say things like, money is not happiness. On the other hand, money is important to facilitating happiness. He's going to say pleasure, physical pleasure. That's important because there are other types of pleasures. There's pleasures of the body and there's pleasures of the soul, heart and mind, right? He's going to say pleasure is not happiness, but pleasure is important in our lives. Well, let me also ask this. Is pain sometimes necessary for our own happiness? And I don't mean some type of sadistic pain, but there are certain things that are not pleasurable. What kind of things are not pleasurable, but that are also beneficial to our happiness?
Letting go of someone that's not beneficial to us, that's hurting us. Like relationship wise.
Okay, so I think Aristotle in book 9, Aristotle is going to talk about those kind of issues. And it's going to be a lot more exciting than some of the things we're talking about now. But okay, so emotional pain actually can contribute to our happiness in some context, because maybe we are willing to let go of someone who's not actually beneficial for us. What else? What about physical? Maybe they're not pains, but they're not necessarily pleasurable. What type of physical pain can actually be beneficial to you? I think there's a simple, obvious one. So whoever's got your hand.
Out.
Yeah, right. Working out. So there are certain types of things that are good for us that are actually painful. And on the flip side, that there's many things that are pleasurable that actually turn out not to be good for us. You take the obvious, like hard drugs. So this life of pleasure that he's talking about could be people who do drugs. And obviously, if you're doing something like heroin or, you know, some kind of really self-destructive drug, not only does it just can kill you, but it destroys your soul. Mohammed, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I was gonna say athletes like boxers or MMA fighters, if they're like sparring and like they when they spar, they're obviously gonna get hurt, but that's basically like them learning and improving in their skills, so that way they can perform better in the actual fight. If you know what I'm
Yeah,
trying to
I
say.
mean, if you think about what athletes go through with their bodies, they subject themselves to all kinds of pain because they have a larger goal in mind. And achieving the goal actually means going through some pain. I was actually watching a little video on Herschel Walker. He was a running back for the Dallas Cowboys and Minnesota Vikings back in the 80s and 90s. And when he was in high school, he used to do like 1,000 push-ups and 1,000 sit-ups and 1,000 uh, uh, push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups every day. And oh my God, my body started hurting just him describing that. Can you imagine someone actually doing that? It's crazy for me. But he put himself through intense physical, I would think that's pain for a while anyway, until you get good at it, all for a higher goal, right? And he had different motivations for wanting to get in shape. Okay, so the first opinion about happiness is that it's physical pleasure. And then he says, for the especially prominent ways of life. What he means by that is there's kind of three ways of life that are typically considered lives that are happy lives. And this is what happiness is. And what are they? He says the one just mentioned. And what does he mean? He means the life of pleasure. And then he talks about the political life. And you're saying politics, how is the life of politics happy? Well, he has a very specific definition of what he means. And then he says, third, the happy life is the contemplative life. What does he mean? Any thoughts about what he means by the contemplative life? What is a life of contemplation? What does that look like? Any thoughts?
You said, what is the life of contemplation?
Yeah, he says that the third kind of candidate for a happy life is the life of contemplation, or what he calls the contemplative life.
Always think being prestigious.
Being what?
Prestigious when you move, always thinking things thoroughly through. Or trying to think things thoroughly through, you know.
Yeah, we might even say more the life of thinking, right? So Ramon, I think, pretty much has it. A life of seeking knowledge and wisdom and education, right? And seeking this knowledge not simply to be successful in some other domain, but seeking knowledge, as Aristotle would say, for its own sake, right? In another book, Aristotle says something really important that connects to this issue of the contemplative life. He says, because the human being has reason or is rational, he says all human beings desire to know. And some human beings, their biggest desire is the quest or the pursuit of knowledge, of understanding, of wisdom for its own sake. And one thing Aristotle is implicitly kind of arguing for is that people, life of pleasure, there are people who desire sex. There are people who desire booze and drugs. They desire to watch sports. They desire to play sports. They desire to make money. And they desire it really intensely. like the desire for sex, for example, at the average person at a certain period in their life. And he says, you know what? There are some people who desire knowledge with the same intensity that other people might desire sex, right? Does that make sense? Okay. Ganel, you want to read the next paragraph?
Sure. Now, in choosing a life of fatted cattle, the many appear altogether slavish, but they retain a hearing, because many people in positions of authority experience passions like those of
Sardinia Palace.
Palace. The refined and active, on the other hand, choose honor, for this is pretty much the end of the political life.
Okay, let's pause for a second. I'm sorry, this is Aristotle. It's like hieroglyphs. You got to translate it every step of the way. He says, now in choosing a life of fatted cattle, the many, remember the many are the crude people, the uneducated people, the uncultured people with bad habits, with bad manners. He describes them as living a life of fatted cattle. What does he mean by fatted cattle? What's the purpose of cattle? You get them to eat a lot, you fatten them up, and then you slaughter them, right? It's a really kind of arrogant and snobby perspective he has here. He says the many appear altogether slavish, but they attain a hearing because many people in positions of authority, meaning important people, also think passion is happiness, or pleasure is happiness, like Sardinia Palace. You know, oh my God, who the hell is this guy Sardinia Palace? Pardon my French. There's actually a footnote down here, but it doesn't explain everything. Sardinia Palace was an ancient Assyrian king. He was a historical figure in basically ancient Mesopotamia. And he lived this incredibly decadent life. He had like concubines and servants, and he drank wine and he ate food. And he was a king. And instead of taking care of his people and ruling them justly and doing all the things that he's basically is a monarch, doing all the things to take care of them, he spent his life using all the wealth that he has as king to just live indulgently, kind of like a couch potato, right? And the famous story is that, you know, the enemy came to the gates, and instead of fighting the enemy, he just kind of stayed in his chamber and like kept indulging in his kind of decadent life of physical pleasure, and like he didn't care that the enemy was there because he was so consumed by the life of pleasure. And if you think about it, and I don't mean this to cast aspersions and to be critical or to, but I mean, if you think about the kind of problems like someone who's a drug addict has, the physical pool of the drug and like the high is so overwhelming for them that it compels them to leave off all their lives, in some cases, obviously not all, but in some rare extreme cases, to leave off all those important things that we think are extremely important obligations of our lives, right? I mean, like you see awful stories in the news of like the mother who's left their child somewhere because they're getting high. Well, anyway, here's Sardinia Palace. Not only has he given up a couple people, but his whole kingdom because he's indulging in his place. So that's the issue here. And he describes these people as slavish. People who, and we can disagree with Aristotle, and he's judgmental here, right? Unlike us, he's willing to make judgments and be politically incorrect. The people who pursue happiness as physical pleasure are slavish. Questions: what are they slaves to? Because they're not slaves to another human being. What are these people enslaved to? Muhammad, their desires. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so Aristotle has a very important model that we'll look at next class of the human soul. He says this: human nature consists of a body and a soul. We're two parts. He says the soul should rule the body like a master, because he uses this language of master and servant, or master and slave. And then so the soul should be the ruler of the human body, which makes sense because we have a soul and it's the thinking part of us, right? Then he says within our soul is divided between reason on the one hand and passions on the other, right? And he says that given that we're a rational animal, within the soul, reason should rule, meaning reason should rule the passions in the same way that the soul rules over the body, and that the passion should be slave to reason, and reason is like the captain of the ship or the master, or you might even say the ruler of the human being. It should be the ruler of the human being, right? And think about this. He's going to say that when reason rules in one's soul, you have self-restraint or self-control, or another word is self-governance, right? What kind of, this is an important question, because he tries to understand human happiness by comparing us to other animals. I didn't mean to say that exactly. What kind of beings are just ruled by their passions or their desires or the impulses, and it's okay that they're ruled by their desires, passions, or impulses? Yes, animals. Animals by definition. Now, it's a little more complicated, but the basic rule is that, animals are completely guided by their impulses, by their passions, right? Because it's all kind of hardwired and they just respond to their environment, right? So we have passions because we're like other animals, but we also have reason. And Aristotle's fundamental argument is that because we have reason, we have the ability to think, we have the ability to choose, that therefore reason should be the guide of our actions. When Aristotle or Plato, when they say something like reason should rule the passions, what they're really saying is reason should guide our actions. We should think and we should choose, right? If we think about the polis was the life where people came together to reason, to determine how they were going to live together, right? So here's the thing. Sardinia Palace, or people who think pleasure is happiness, they're what? They're slaves to their passions, and they're living a less than human life because they're not using their reason to guide their actions. Does everybody get that? Okay. Now, this is an important question. And it's not like he comes out and says this explicitly somewhere. For Aristotle, are all passions bad? Does he think just emotions and desires, all these instincts we have, does he think that they're all just bad and we shouldn't have any physical pleasure at all? Muhammad says no. Thais says no. Absolutely. I mean, Aristotle recognizes that there's two parts of us. There's a rational part and there's an animal part. And while the rational part may be the highest, each part has its place in our life. It's really important. He's not condemning pleasure as such, this animal pleasure. What he is saying is it's important, but it ain't happiness. It ain't happiness. Okay. The refined and active, on the other hand, so right after, we'll come back to this and we'll finish up in just a few minutes. The refined and active, on the other hand, choose honor. So he contrasts the crude who seek physical pleasure with the refined who seek honor. And they think honor is happiness. What is someone who's refined? Someone who has had education, someone who has all the manners and habits. You could even say today, someone who went to an Ivy League school and, they wear their coat and tie and look spiffy and they act the part of this kind of dignified human being that thinks they're the most important person in the world or something like that. And he says, these people seek honor, for this is pretty much the end of the political life. So the big question is, what is honor? Because these people think that happiness is honor seeking and getting honor or being honored. What is honor? A word we don't use that much. If we just hang in there for a couple more minutes. What does it mean to seek honor? What does it mean to be honored? What's a kind of another way of
recognized for your accomplishments and your achievements by your peers?
Absolutely. To seek honor is to seek recognition. And Stephen, perfectly, what do you want to be recognized for? Or what do you want to be esteemed? To have esteem is a sense of worth. People who seek honor want to be recognized for their sense of worth. And typically, we would think that people who achieve things then have worth because, we live in the world of, well, at one point, maybe it's not so much today, but we lived in this world where everybody was supposed to have self-esteem, even if they hadn't done anything or hadn't worked hard, right? I mean, you start realizing if you want to feel good about yourself rather than lousy, you can't just have other people tell you you're special. You actually have to go and work and accomplish something. Adults kind of figure that out at a certain point. So people want to be recognized for their sense of worth, right? So there's one interesting thing that Aristotle is concerned with human happiness. Just like in his society, as in ours, we often think that the people in society who are happy just had good luck, like they won the lottery, right? And in his world, they had a word for that. The Greek word is makarios. And what makarios means is that person is blessed and like blessed by the gods, right? And it's just another way of saying that they had good luck or good fortune because, for example, like they won the lottery, right? Is that what makes happiness just like dumb luck? What do people think? Is being happy just a matter of luck or chance? Muhammad says, no, I don't think so. Let's ask the question relative to Aristotle. Does Aristotle think happiness is a matter of luck? Nefertiti, no, not at all. Amen, sister, you nailed it. Aristotle wanted to kind of push back on the same sensibility that we have sometimes. We look at that person who has $1 billion and they look like they're on Facebook and they just look so freaking like life's so perfect, right? And we look at them and we're jealous. We say, man, they're just lucky, right? They won the lottery or whatever it is, right? Aristotle crafts a definition of happiness that has nothing. Well, I don't want to say nothing. We do need he even acknowledges we need a little bit of luck. Like we do have to have some things go our way. but he wants to make human happiness as much about our efforts as possible. It's not about our circumstances. It's about what we try to do to achieve. And he has a very specific definition of success or achievement, but his vision of happiness is a kind of, it's work, it's labor, and it's your labor. The big thing is, it's all about those things that you can actually control in a world where you definitely cannot control everything. There's many things, most things you cannot control. So for him, he crafts a definition of happiness that to the greatest extent possible, it's about what you can control and what you can do and the efforts you can make. So here's the thing. If I seek honor, who do I seek it from? Just go 2 more minutes and we'll call it a night. If I seek honor, who do I seek it from? Muhammad says, could we just kind of stay? We'll finish up in just a minute. We could speak aloud instead of typing. I seek honor from other people. What does that mean? If my vision of happiness is seeking recognition for my own sense of self-worth from other people, what's the problem for Aristotle with that understanding of happiness?
I guess in the regard, maybe because he thinks that you shouldn't be, because that's more of like an external thing, maybe.
Yes, it's an extra.
Yeah.
He would call it an external good.
Yeah, essentially it's like an external good. So I think that's would be the problem he'd have, because yeah, like I'm not exactly sure, but that's what I'm going with.
Okay, good. So for him, the world of politics is not about making the world a better place. He's very realistic. For him, the world of politics is about people going into politics to be recognized, to get attention, to have power and fame. Does that sound realistic? Isn't everybody in Washington, D.C. there to help the people? Are we here, folks?
Yes, Professor.
So what do we think motivates politicians to go into politics? Is it self-interest or because they want to save the world?
It depends on the politician.
Okay, good. So it depends on the politician. It can be both. Notice Aristotle here, he seems to think that most people who go into politics do it for a form of self-interest he calls honor. What's the problem with your happiness coming in the form of honor? It means you're dependent on those who honor you, the people who you honor you. What's the problem with that?
Essentially, people like they'll honor you in the moment, but if you do anything to mess it up, they'll forget about you. They'll dishonor you.
All right, so the people are, yeah, Nefertiti, go for it.
There's no promise that you're ever going to be recognized. You could put forth,
Absolutely.
A great effort, and you may never be recognized, and it'll lead to great disappointment. You know,
You have a yes.
You shouldn't do anything for anybody else. You should just do it for the enjoyment and of self-pleasurement.
Okay.
Self-rewards.
So this is going to be an interesting argument because Aristotle is going to say we do care about certain people's opinion, and we do care about what they think about us. But when you say the people, Muhammad, you're talking about the opinions of everyone in the society, pretty much the majority of the people. And the problem is, I'm sorry, yes?
Oh, sorry. I was going to say it could be fans or supporters.
Yeah. Yeah. So the problem with this is one day you want You want them, you want your props, right? I want the people to love me so much. And on day one, everybody loves you and there's adulation and they're screaming, I don't know, Obama, 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 Joe Biden, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, we love you, we love you. And then the next day they're screaming F Joe Biden, right? Something like that. And does this happen sometimes? Well, I would say that like the very essence of political life is that one day the crowd loves you and the next day you don't. And, in the ancient Greek world, politics was like the place for power and fame, right? So today we have like the music world, we have the sports world with superstar athletes who want to be loved and so on. So for him, it was politics. And he thought that most people who went into politics was less about making the world a better place and more about them getting recognition. And the problem is you're making your life dependent on a whole bunch of other people to judge you, who one day they love you, the next day they're gone, or even worse, they don't like you, right? So this is really important. We've set up a model here of people being judged by others, right? And this is what we do. And Aristotle acknowledges in the politics, he says the individual, the community is prior to the individual. The individual's identity is dependent on the people they're around. They don't exist except at least in part through the eyes of other people. Well, so Nefertiti, you got to a big point, and we'll be done just a couple minutes here. In terms of our own happiness, should we care about other people's opinion of us? Or should we just do our thing, what we believe deep in our heart, without any regard for other people's opinions?
You just do your thing.
Muhammad said, just do your thing.
You shouldn't, but the problem is we do.
We shouldn't what?
We shouldn't care what people say about us because it could be overwhelming and consume us, and it could cause other things. But at the back end, we kind of do.
Janae, you agree with which position?
Based on what Muhammad said.
Which was which
just
one?
do what you, I guess, just do.
Just do what you feel is right.
Yes.
Okay. Muhammad, you wanna add anything to that?
Yeah, I was gonna say that sometimes caring about what other people think can actually help you succeed. Like a lot of the greatest athletes of all time, Kobe, Chris Paul, they put a lot of work into their craft because of basically people doubting them when they were younger.
Okay.
Like,
So now you're going to the other side, that there may be an element of human happiness that not only do we care about other people's opinions, but maybe at least in the right situation, in the certain situation, we should care, right?
Like in certain regards, like sometimes
Okay.
no, because you can't please everybody. Like,
Okay. So you just hit it. The problem with the politician is not that they want to be esteemed by other human beings. The problem is that they want to be esteemed by whom?
Everyone.
Yes. The problem is they don't discriminate who is going to be the judge of their person or the judge of their actions or the judge of their character. They want everyone to love them. And as we all know, you can't please everybody all the time, and that's a recipe for disaster, right? So Aristotle's point is going to be that absolutely you should be concerned with other people's opinion. Why? Because you see yourself through their eyes. Let me ask you this. Imagine if your wife hated you, your children hated you, your dog hated you, your goldfish hated you. Is there a problem there?
Yeah, because essentially to you feel like even your loved ones don't love you.
Yeah, well, those are all the people who might otherwise care about you, and they all have a problem with whatever it is you're doing. Do you think it would be a good idea to heed their criticism?
if it depends, like if you're doing something self-destructing that's hurting yourself or others, then yeah,
Well,
you shouldn't do it.
Well, let's just imagine that it would be really hard for all those people to simultaneously have a problem with your conduct. They probably were right about something, I would guess.
In that regard, because if they're your family, they most likely care about your well-being.
Okay,
Unless they're,
so I mean that's one element. If all the people who care about you are having a problem with your conduct, who's probably in the right and who's probably in the wrong?
probably the people that care about you, they're right, and you're
Yeah,
in
they're
the wrong.
you know, in a hypothetical situation, there's probably something there. There's probably
Yeah.
something you should listen to. Okay. Aristotle thinks it's absolutely vital that we're concerned with other people's opinions. It's just not everybody's opinion. Question. What is the name he's going to give to people whose opinion you should care about? Because we're social animals. We cannot, as much as we want to talk about, oh, I just do my own thing. As much as we talk about that, we all see ourselves through other people's eyes. The question is, whose eyes? Whose eyes matter? What's the name Aristotle's going to give those people?
Your friends or your family.
Yes, friends. Friends who are wise. Friends who have good judgment. Friends who care about you, right? If they actually have those things, we absolutely better listen to them. So the question is, if our goal is happiness, and happiness is virtuous activity, the question we're going to have to answer is exactly what role do friends play in helping us achieve our happiness, right? And here we've already come up with one that they judge us. They tell us the truth, right? People who aren't our friends don't tell us the truth for all kinds of reasons. They tell you what you want to hear. It's only your friends who are actually going to be honest with you. Okay, let's just finish this paragraph and we'll be done for the night. Janelle, do you think you can finish up here? Ganel, I'm sorry.
Yes, but it appears to be more than superficial than what is being sought. For honor seems to reside more with those who bestow it than with him who receives it. And we define that the good is something of one's own and a thing that's easily taken away.
A thing that is not easily taken away.
Sorry, I'm not with my class.
That's really important. That's
Yeah,
why I'm
not,
doing that.
sorry. The print is really small, sorry.
I-
Furthermore, Furthermore, people seem to pursue honor so that they may be convinced that they themselves are good. At any rate, they seek to be honored by the prudent. Among those to whom they are known and for their virtue. It is clear then that in the case of these people, at least virtue is superior.
Okay, so this has to do with why he thinks the life of honor is better than the life of pleasure, because the life of honor actually involves virtue. Actually involves virtue. Okay, so let me come back here. He says the refined and active choose honor, for this is pretty much the goal of political life. People go into politics because they want recognition. They want their self-worth to be seen and acknowledged by other people. He says, but it appears to be more superficial than what is being sought. Question, what is book one seeking? What are we seeking to figure out in book one of the ethics? We're trying to understand what? We're trying to understand what human happiness is, right? He says honor is more superficial than what he thinks human happiness is. He says this is important, and we're done. For honor seems to reside more with those who bestow it than with him who receives it. What does he mean by that? He says honor seems to reside more with those who bestow it than those who receive it. What does it mean to bestow honor? What does it mean to bestow?
To give.
Yes, to give. So who are the more honorable people? The people who give honor or receive it? Who are the more noble people? The people who give it or receive it?
I'd say give.
That's what he says. And any thoughts why that is? Why are the people better, the ones who give honor, than those who sit back and receive it? Why are they better? Why is that life better? I mean, showing honor to a politician is a little bit like loving them. It's a little bit like being concerned for them. Let me ask this. What is the politician doing when they receive the honor?
I think I'm going to change my answer. I think receive. I don't know.
No. I mean, what Aristotle is arguing is what you said the first time. The people who give the honor are better than the people receiving it because number one, as Muhammad says, they're giving a benefit. They're actually doing something. They're actually doing something. Whereas the other people are just sitting back and taking it. And not only are they giving something, they're giving something that in a sense is good. And the person who receives it is not giving anything back. And the big thing is they're doing something. What is happiness? Happiness is living virtuously. Living virtuously implies action. It implies doing stuff rather than just passively. This is why the person who wins the lottery is not by definition happy for Aristotle, because they haven't done anything to earn it. It just falls in their lap, right? These people actually do stuff, the people who bestow honor. Just a couple more lines here. He says, and we divine, like we understand, we intuit that the good is something of one's own and not easily taken away. So this is exactly what you just said about one day people are honored and the next day the people take away the recognition and the fame, right? He says, the good, when he says the good here, right? He means human happiness. Human happiness is something that's yours. It's not something that's given to you by someone else. And it's not easily taken away. Why is it not easily taken away? Because it's yours, right? Money comes and goes, fame comes and goes, but your virtue and your character, your good character, is something that nobody can take away from you. I think everybody understands this. And then it gets more interesting, and this is the end where we're going to conclude. He says further, he says, people seem to pursue honor so that they may be convinced that they themselves are good. This is a really huge statement that we're going to see play out in book 9. He says, people pursue honor so that they may be convinced that they themselves are good, just like good people, right? Any thoughts? If we could just hang with the last sentence here. What does he mean by that? People pursue honor so that they can convince themselves that they're good people. Let me ask this. Do good people need to convince themselves that they're good?
No.
No. What kind of people pursue honor? People who are what? Aristotle's argument anyway. They're definitely dependent on others, and we're getting to the question of why. And they're arrogant. Absolutely. He's going to talk about kind of narcissism in book 9. If they have to convince themselves they're good by seeking honor from other people who tell them that they're good, think about what the honor says. Oh yeah, you're the greatest person in the world. You're famous. I love you. Blah, 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 blah. Lady Gaga, you're amazing. Whatever it is. If they have to convince themselves they're good, what kind of person are they actually? Insinuates Aristotle, suggests Aristotle, a bad person. This is Aristotle's argument. You might not agree with it, but this is the argument he makes, and we're going to see this again. Why do people, when that politician seeks attention from the masses, what they want is flattery. Flattery. What is flattery? What is flattery? Compliments and inappropriate compliments. Saying that you are great when you're not necessarily great, right? In particular, flattery, people tell you what you want to hear, positive things, right? That boosts someone's ego. Absolutely. Absolutely. And flattery is certainly not the truth, right? And the big thing is, Aristotle's going to talk about it later, but he's going to say real friends tell you the truth. They tell it not to hurt your feelings, although it might hurt your feelings. They tell it because the truth is the best thing for you if you want to be happy. Because if someone's lying to you and saying that you're great or saying that you have nothing to work on, you're not helping yourself get to where you need to be. You can think about that in all aspects of your life, right? So what's the catch here? These people who seek honor, they could be politicians in Aristotle's world. In our world, they could be like movie stars. They could be celebrities, people famous for being famous. What's he really saying? These people, this is his argument. They're not good people because they don't live a good life. They don't live a good, decent, wholesome life. Without getting into the details of exactly what decent is, what good is, just leave that for now. He says, they don't live a decent life. And guess what? They don't love themselves. They don't think highly of themselves because they know they don't do the right things for themselves. Right? He's going to say this later on in so many words. And so what do they do when they don't? Look, think about it. They don't have it turns out that they actually don't have self-esteem, right? They don't have a high opinion of themselves. Why do they not have a high opinion of themselves, says Aristotle? Because they're not good people. That's why they have to convince themselves that they're good, because they know they're not. And I mean, y'all must know people like this, and maybe even ourselves. We've all acted this way, where we act imperfectly and seek attention from other people as what? As a distraction from our own opinion of ourselves, right? So he says there's a certain type of person who seeks out a certain type of friendship. It's not going to be real friendship. It's not going to be true friendship, but they seek to get compliments and flattery from people around them to distract from their own opinion of themselves that is not so good, right? Also, how are they going to present these people who are not so good, who seek honor and recognition from, say, the public or other people? How are they going to present themselves? Are they going to present themselves as bad people? To the public?
No, they're not.
Certainly not. They're going to present themselves as really good people because they want the adulation and they want to be told they're good because it's going to make them feel better. I mean, you actually can see some elements of the Ring of Gyges here. He does things bad when nobody's looking, and then when he's out in public, he puts his best face on to get adulation and a reputation for being a good person. Here, the concern is different. It's not about power. The concern is about one's psychology and one's mental and psychological well-being, right? Well, let me finish. Do people know people who act like this? People who really don't have self-esteem, but they go out and they seem very narcissistic and egoistic, and they court like the flattery from other people, and it makes them very concerned for the opinions of other people. Do we know people like this? Is Aristotle is this just a book description, or is this like something that actually occurs in the real world? Any thoughts?
I said it actually occurs in the real world.
I thought someone was speaking. It was like way in the background. Okay. Can we all imagine like people that we've known acting this way?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. What's interesting is that Aristotle here gives a kind of underlying motivational explanation as to why these people act this way, right? They see something flawed in themselves that makes them unhappy, or we can use the word unhappy, and that therefore they go seeking out attention from others to kind of conceal their own low opinion of themselves. They present a perfect image of themselves to the public, and therefore the public adulate, or whoever it is, whatever group they're looking for. And of course, what we know is we should be concerned with the opinions of people who really care about us, number one. And number two, when people really care about us, they're certainly not going to flatter us all the time. They're going to tell us the truth, and the truth is going to help contribute to our happiness, because it's what we really need to hear if we want to fix the issues, the problems, the challenges in our life. And I'll just conclude with this. Aristotle absolutely believes that happiness is like an ongoing effort. It's like rolling the stone up the hill every day. It's something that you constantly have to work for and try to achieve. And it takes basically the duration of a whole life to really achieve this thing he calls happiness. And that means it constantly consists of kind of facing the challenges of life and trying to meet them, and trying to meet them with your compadres, to meet them with your friends who you're going to be dependent on in life, because we're not self-sufficient. We can't do things on our own. That's one of the primary observations about human beings in the politics, which compels us, that need that we have, that lack of self-sufficiency. It compels us to form communities, starting with families and then expanding out toward friends. Okay, so we've gone way over time here. Thank you for hanging in there. Thoughts, questions, comments before we go here? Because otherwise, thank you for a lovely class. And we're going to pick up with book 9. We'll talk about a few more things about friendship, but then and the human soul, and then we'll move into book 9. Excuse me, book 8 next class. Book 8. I take it we're ready to go here. I mean, class is dismissed.
Professor,